Nora inhaled the stale air inside her visor, feeling her breath condense against the glass. No matter how many times she stepped outside, the oppressive gray sky and crumbling horizon never ceased to make her uneasy. She stood on a cracked asphalt road that once led to a bustling city, now reduced to mounds of twisted metal and shattered concrete. Her nuclear-powered exosuit hummed quietly, its fuel rod hidden in a reinforced compartment on her spine. It was an unlikely lifeline in a world gone dark, proof of humanity's persistence, long after the last bombs had fallen. She scanned the deserted street for signs of life. Drifting ash obscured her vision, so she tapped a switch on her wrist console, engaging enhanced optics. Radiation levels spiked on her screen, but she'd encountered worse. Chunks of glowing rubble and misshapen vegetation whispered stories of the invisible danger lurking in the air. This wasn't her first expedition. She'd been exploring these wastes for years, salvaging technology and resources. Yet every time she felt the same subtle knot of fear in her stomach. The suits weren't invincible. They needed constant maintenance, and even a small leak in the seals could mean a death sentence. But ever since she was chosen to become an explorer, to trudge through the irradiated remains of civilization, Nora had taught herself to bury fear beneath necessity. The world demanded resilience now. Her radio crackled. "Nora," came Jonas's voice, faint but steady. "How are you doing out there?" She could already imagine him hunched over the radio console, heavy goggles strapped to his forehead, worry lines etched into his brow. Jonas was the settlement's lead mechanic and, truth be told, her closest friend. He'd spent months reinforcing her exosuit's plating to withstand the intensifying radiation levels, all for the cause of finding scraps that might help keep the last vestiges of civilization alive. Yet he was always anxious, always second-guessing. Perhaps he had every right to be. No one had seen how catastrophic the old world's downfall was like Jonas did. He'd lost far too much. She pressed a button on her gauntlet. "I'm fine." Her voice sounded firmer than she felt, heading toward what used to be the metro center. Radiation is high, but the suit's holding. She scanned the horizon, spotting the gaunt skeleton of a fallen skyscraper. "I'll circle around the collapsed highways first, see if I can find a route to the sublevels." The metro lines were rumored to be full of pre-war technologies and caches of stored supplies. If even half the rumors were true, it could change everything for their settlement. The path forward was blocked by the remains of an overturned bus. Its once bright yellow exterior was now a pitted, corroded shell. She edged around it carefully. The ground was unstable. Entire slabs of concrete had collapsed into sinkholes. One misstep could send her plummeting beneath the surface. She remembered the day she rescued a fellow explorer who had fallen into one. A harrowing experience that left her shaken for weeks. Still, glimpses of children's drawings on the bus windows reminded her with painful clarity that a world full of color and noise once existed. Now, even the word normal felt like a relic. Sometimes she tried to picture how it all looked before: bustling streets, neon lights, and the hum of everyday life. Even though she had been barely old enough to comprehend the gravity of the bombs when they fell, she could still recall some lost sense of human closeness, of community. She shook away the memories and reminded herself to stay vigilant. The partial meltdown of nuclear plants after the war turned wide sections of the continent into uninhabitable zones. The intense radiation had twisted local fauna and flora into grotesque shapes, forever changed. If she was unlucky, she might even stumble upon mutated beasts forged by that toxic environment. Her suit clicked and hissed as it filtered the air. A slight increase in temperature told her the internal system was working overtime. She whispered a thankful prayer to the engineers who had designed the nuclear-powered suits, marveling again at their brilliance. Many of those visionaries never saw their creations put to use. They had perished before final tests, leaving behind their meticulously compiled blueprints. The suits drew power from compact fission cores, each stabilized by layered shielding to prevent meltdown. This was humanity's last advantage, an echo of the very forces that had raised the Earth. She advanced across a stretch of cracked asphalt. Now the skyline of the ruined city loomed closer, a ghostly silhouette of towering metal and broken windows. Rusted scaffolding jutted upward, some sections drooping precariously overhead. Beneath her boots, the ground shimmered with dust. She flipped through her suit's vision modes, looking for anomalies. A slight reading to her left made her pause, the residue of a thermal signature. Whatever had made it wasn't big, but it wasn't just the heat from the sun. She crouched behind a shattered concrete barricade and toggled her microphone off. No point alerting Jonas yet if it was nothing. She peered cautiously in that direction, heart thumping. A mutated dog sniffed at the rubble. Its fur had fallen away in patches, and sores covered its side. Nora grimaced. She had no wish to harm it, but it had to be handled carefully. Other explorers had told gruesome stories of these canines attacking in packs. Some had jaws now strong enough to dent steel. Holding her breath, she eased to the right, stepping lightly to avoid detection. The dog's ears perked up. It lifted its head, nose twitching. Nora froze. Sweat rolled down her temple inside the visor. With a low growl, the creature lurched her way, but she was ready. She activated a pulse on her gauntlet that released a sudden flash of bright light. The dog yelped in surprise, blinking in confusion as it retreated, then bolted away into the broken streets. She pressed her back against the barricade, feeling relieved. Jonas's voice crackled again. "Heard a spike in your suit's power usage. Everything okay?" "Just scared off a stray," she said, forcing a small laugh. "Now heading further downtown. Please stay safe." He paused. "By the way, we had a runner from East Settlement. They say they've found a large deposit of salvageable metal near the old train yards. If we can get to it, maybe we can upgrade the entire suit fleet." His words stoked a flame of hope in her chest. New suits could mean more survivors able to forage and survive. "I'll check it out," she promised, setting off toward the city center. It might take her an extra day to reach the old train yards, but she'd weigh the risk. Ruined avenues stretched out before her like the skeleton of a once mighty beast. Threads of greenish mold clung to collapsed buildings. She saw the remains of a monument in the distance, perhaps a statue toppled by the shock waves. Approaching carefully, she forced open a creaking gate. The city square had been turned into a churned-up plain of debris. Rotted benches and corroded street lamps poked up in lonely vigil. She ran her gloved hand across one lamp's surface, feeling the flaking metal crumble. Out of the corner of her eye, she spotted a sign half buried in rubble and crouched to brush away the dust. Large letters spelling "evacuation" were partially legible, with smaller text instructing civilians to gather at designated underground shelters. Her breath caught in her throat as she imagined the panic on that final day when the air raid sirens blared and the sky turned crimson with fire. The sign was battered, but it felt like a relic from another world, a final reminder that people had once tried to save themselves. She rose and scanned the area. The meltdown had warped more than just animals. The air shimmered with residual radiation, forming patches of swirling luminescence at times. She continued, steps echoing in the silent city. Bits of graffiti clung to certain walls, strange shapes left by those desperate for a last statement before disappearing forever. Sometimes, faces were crudely sketched in the paint, weeping features rendered in bright colors. Other times, scrawled words spelled messages of defiance or heartbreak. She found herself reading them quietly, in an almost ritualistic act of remembrance. Venturing deeper, she finally located the entrance to the metro station. The roof had caved in around the escalators, forming a tangled nest of rebar and concrete. A rancid smell wafted out, but she pressed on, stepping cautiously. Her viewport adjusted to the darkness, highlighting rusting beams and moldering posters on the walls. Part of her was anxious. Underground spaces could trap radiation pockets more effectively, increasing the danger. But these sealed tunnels were also rumored to hold medical supplies, left over from hasty emergency stashes when the bombs fell. She listened sharply, attuned to the echo of every footstep. Dripping water somewhere in the distance reverberated eerily. Checking her suit's gauge, she confirmed stable temperature and sealed environment. Flicking on a small headlamp, she shone its beam into the gloom. The corridor up ahead was collapsed, but there was a narrow passage to the right. She squeezed through, wincing as sharp edges scraped her armor's plating. The remains of a security checkpoint emerged, with rusted metal detectors and shattered glass partitions. Beyond it, a wide, once bustling subway platform lay under a veil of dust and debris. Dented turnstiles and half-buried benches told stories of morning commutes and city hustle, abruptly silenced. She navigated carefully over concrete chunks and twisted rails. A sharp crack startled her. She raised her gauntlet, scanning for threats. Nothing. The noise repeated. It sounded like falling debris. Heart pounding, she continued forward until she found the source. Part of the ceiling had collapsed into the platform. The wreckage had revealed a storage room behind what must have been a locked door. Eager to investigate, Nora squeezed into the gap. Inside, she discovered an old supply closet. Most of the shelves were covered in thick dust, with battered metal cases strewn about. She tried prying one open, but found the latch nearly rusted shut. After a few tries, she lifted the lid with a squeal of dislodged hinges. Inside, she found sealed containers labeled Radiation Treatment Emergency Use. Her pulse soared. If these were still viable, they could be invaluable for her settlement. She carefully examined their external indicators. The sterilized seals remained intact. She let out a small breath of excitement that fogged her visor. This find alone made the entire trip worthwhile. Jonas's voice crackled in her ear again. "You're deeper underground now. Radiation spikes are higher out here. It's climbing. I advise caution." "Copy that." She tucked the containers into her pack. "Found some medical supplies. I'll wrap up soon and head back." She paused, wondering whether to mention her plan to detour to the train yards. Perhaps it was best to confirm her route now. "Jonas," she said hesitantly, "I heard about the salvage. I'm thinking of redirecting midway to check it out before returning." A shadow of disapproval registered in his silence. "You're loud and clear," he finally said, "but be careful. I'd rather have you return safely. Those train yards are rumored to be crawling with other things." He needed to say no more. Abominations roamed these ruins, mutated wildlife, rogue machines, and sometimes even other desperate survivors who would kill for a working exosuit. She had to weigh the danger, but resources were desperately needed, and she had the advantage of a well-tuned suit. "I'll be fast," she promised, heading back up. Emerging from the metro, Nora shielded her visor from the piercing daylight. Her Geiger counter clicked more rapidly out here. Smoke in the air made her throat tighten, reminding her once more that no environment was truly safe. She trudged north, away from the city center in search of the train yards. The roads twisted into half-flooded underpasses and broken overpasses. She was forced off the main route several times, navigating the labyrinth of rubble and collapsed architecture. Now and then, she heard faint scuttling. Her suit's sensors picked up fleeting movements, possibly small irradiated creatures. Most seemed to scatter, intimidated by her presence. She remained on guard, scanning for anything bigger. Eventually, she spotted the skeletal remains of train tracks stretching into the horizon. The area opened up into an enormous yard, filled with rusting freight cars and toppled cargo containers. A jagged fence enclosed the place. The sign above the gate was twisted beyond recognition, its letters missing or warped by intense heat. Stacks of shipping crates, half sunken in mud and radioactive puddles, formed a maze of rotted metal husks. She approached with caution. Then she saw it. A cluster of large metal sheets piled near a mangled locomotive. Her heart skipped at the potential. If that heap retained structural integrity, the settlement could repurpose it to fortify walls, build additional suits, or even create more efficient water purifiers. Jonas had been right. This was a gold mine. The only question, was it guarded or infested with something malevolent? She scoped the perimeter with her suit's imaging. There, hidden between two freight containers, she noticed subtle movement. She knelt behind a corrugated barrier and watched. Mutated human silhouettes shifted in the gloom, scrawny, wrapped in rags, their faces partially obscured. Raiders, or simply desperate survivors. They had firearms, likely scavenged from old bunkers. They seemed to be defending the scrap heap, as though it was their territory. Nora clenched her fist, uncertain whether to risk conflict. She counted 4 of them. In a better world, she might have tried diplomacy. But in the wastes, confrontations could turn deadly in seconds. She reminded herself of her mission. Secure resources, bring them home. Survive. At best, maybe a trade was possible. Though with her settlement supplies stretched thin, she doubted she had much to offer. The alternative was evasion or force. If she tried to sneak in and out with as much as she could carry, she risked detection, but any aggression might escalate into a firefight. She quietly transmitted the situation to Jonas for advice. His response was tense. "We can't afford to lose you to a lucky gunshot. Try stealth. If that fails, you have the suit's capabilities." She exhaled shakily. Understood. She crept closer, counting her steps, mindful of every shift of gravel beneath her boots. The group had a small campfire burning in a metal drum. Its smoke drifted upward lazily. She deduced that they were likely reliant on minimal gear, probably unaffected by minor radiation levels due to prolonged exposure. But a direct confrontation would be risky. The luminous dial on her wrist indicated the radiation here was moderately high, enough to weaken unshielded people. That might be her edge. Nora located a route behind a toppled freight car. She inched forward, checking corners. Her suit's servos whirred faintly, but she hoped the background noise of the yard masked the sound. She found a stack of metal plating leaning precariously against a battered forklift. If she could pull away a few sheets quietly, she could slip back out without alerting the group. She carefully unfastened the straps that held the plates in place. Sweat trickled down her back. One wrong move could bring the entire stack crashing down, announcing her presence. The metal moaned softly as she freed a sheet. She winced at the noise and froze, listening to see if the group had heard. Their hushed conversation drifted on the breeze, but no one approached. Carefully, she laid the plate on the ground. Even one sheet would help, a second would be a bonus. She repeated the process, managing to unfasten another. Her arms trembled with tension, but she forced herself to remain steady. Then she heard footsteps crunching on gravel. They were approaching. The hair on the back of her neck prickled. She slipped behind the forklift, pressing her body close, trying not to clank. A figure rounded the corner, carrying a crude rifle. Nora's breathing quickened. She glanced sideways. The metal plates lay in plain sight. The figure would soon discover the tampering. Her mind raced. Could she subdue them quietly? Could she outrun them? The figure stopped meters away from the forklift, scanning the yard. Their face was gaunt, eyes red-rimmed from radiation sickness or exhaustion. They looked at the forklift, but didn't see Nora in the shadows. Another voice called, and the figure responded, turning away and walking back to the campfire. Nora released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She had to move fast. Grabbing the two plates, she quickly slung them with a harness at her back, adjusting her suit to compensate for the added weight. It strained her balance, but the exosuit's nuclear-driven servos kicked in, distributing the load. She crept away, adrenaline pounding in her ears. Every second stretched out like an eternity, her senses on high alert. Clearing the fence took careful maneuvering, but she finally slithered through a gap. Only when she was outside the yard did she allow herself a tense smile. She filed a short update to Jonas. "Got 2 large plates. Enough for experiments at least. I'm heading back." She moved as briskly as she dared across the desolate fields beyond the tracks, scanning for any signs of pursuit. The settlement was still miles away, and traveling weighed down by the metal would slow her. She steeled herself for the trek. Each footstep kicked up tiny clouds of radioactive dust, swirling around her visor. The air grew heavier, and the horizon shimmered with a crimson haze. As dusk approached, she spotted a cluster of crumbling houses. It might be safer to find a place to rest and check her equipment. She selected the sturdiest 2-story structure, its roof partially intact, and entered through a shattered window, mindful of broken glass. Inside, the floors were coated in dust. Molded furniture and peeling wallpaper gave the place a haunting aura of normalcy destroyed. She set down her salvage, unfastening the harness. Her shoulders ached. With a hiss, her suit adjusted internal pressure. Nora evaluated the readouts. No breach. Radiation within tolerable levels, power core still stable. She rummaged for a ration bar, carefully pushing the suit's feeding port open. The compressed, tasteless block of nutrients was all she could manage. She chewed slowly in silence, remembering how people once had markets brimming with fresh produce and savory meals. Now, talk of full bellies and thriving agriculture sounded like myth. Tucking the remains of her ration bar away, she conducted a quick sweep of the house. Upstairs she found a bedroom. The bed frame collapsed. A scorched photograph lay on the floor, its edges curled, but she could make out a smiling family. 2 parents, a child perched on their shoulders. She stood there, transfixed by the image of hope and togetherness. Did they manage to escape, or did they perish in the blasts? She gently slid the photo into her pocket, an unspoken tribute to the countless lives lost. She settled in a corner, scanning for structural weaknesses overhead. The walls seemed stable enough. She turned off the external lights to conserve energy, relying on the glow of her visor's display. As she settled, her thoughts drifted to the settlement, to Jonas, to the day's finds. Medicine, raw materials, hope. She drifted into a light sleep, haunted by fleeting nightmares of bombs and fire. Morning arrived without incident. The suit's alarm chimed softly, alerting her to rising external radiation as the sun's heat interacted with the lingering fallout. She gathered her things, hefting the metal plates and double-checking the medical containers. Outside, the sky was a pallid gray, the sun a faint disk behind layers of haze. She put 1 foot forward, starting her final stretch toward home. Travel was slow, but she pushed on, carefully picking her way around sinkholes and collapsed roads. On the outskirts of the city, she felt the ground tremble slightly, the echo of a distant quake or perhaps some structural collapse. She noted the location on her visor's map, guessing that entire sections of the subterranean systems must be giving way under the decades of decay. By mid-afternoon, she glimpsed the largest protective barrier in the region, the steel walls surrounding her settlement. A watchtower stood tall, sporting a new defensive turret powered by a refurbished reactor. Her chest tightened with relief. She identified herself via radio, and a guard recognized her exosuit's transponder. The heavy gates opened and she slipped inside. Jonas was there to greet her with a worried frown. His face relaxed into a tentative smile when he saw her carrying the plates. "You actually did it," he murmured, helping her ease her burden onto the ground. "What you've found will help us so much." She removed her helmet, letting her sweat-soaked hair fall loose. Cool, filtered settlement air touched her skin, and she breathed deeply. "I hope so," she said, her voice raspy with exhaustion. "There's more out there, but so are dangerous people. We'll need to approach carefully if we want the rest." Other members of the settlement crowded around, curiously touching the metal plates or eyeing the sealed medical supply. She saw renewed sparks in their eyes. One old man hobbled over, trembling with excitement as he realized these were genuine radiation treatment kits. A mother with a coughing child behind her tried to hold back tears. Nora felt a lump form in her own throat. These meager salvaged items could save countless lives. It was sobering and empowering at once. Jonas gave her a once-over. "Your suit's readings are still stable. Good. I'll do a full diagnostic on the plating to ensure no cracks formed under the weight." He paused, then lowered his voice. "I'm proud of you, you know." She managed a small smile. "We do what we must." In the coming days, her find propelled a wave of optimism among the settlement. Jonas and his team pored over the plates, testing their durability and forging them into new protective layers for other suits. Doctors carefully opened the medical kits, verifying their viability. Hope surged through the small community like a fresh breeze. Nora watched from the sidelines, exhausted but grateful. Still, she remembered the scavengers in the train yard, the mutated dog, the precarious trek through the metro tunnels. The world beyond these walls was not getting gentler. If anything, it was becoming more unforgiving, as resources dwindled and the environment mutated further. Yet somehow, humankind persisted. Within the settlement, young technicians studied old schematics for the exploration suits, dreaming up improvements. Gardeners in shielded greenhouses coaxed mutated crops into something edible. Families huddled in reinforced dwellings, telling stories lit by flickering bulbs that drew power from battered generators. On the settlement's perimeter, The watchtowers stood vigilant against the creeping darkness. The explorers, men and women whose suits thrummed with nuclear power, were the lifeblood of survival. Nora knew she would soon venture out again, her fear subdued by the necessity of hope. She would step back into the radioactive wind, face down the horrors lurking in the ruins, all for the sake of finding one more glimmer to keep their fragile existence alive. She looked at her suit, resting in a workshop corner. There was a scorch mark on the armor's forearm plate, a reminder of a close call on a previous trip. Someday she might not come back, but as long as she could, she would harness that arcane energy locked inside the fuel core on her back, mashing from the same destructive forces that had ravaged the Earth to carve out a future better than the present. It was a paradox as old as life, forging tools from chaos, rummaging hope from despair. Late that evening, she walked along the settlement's wall, gazing out into the ashen fields beyond. Nightfall turned the sky into an inky canvas, with only faint pinpricks of starlight breaking through the haze. She wondered if people in some far-off corner of the planet were also peering at these same stars, clinging to life as she did. If so, she silently prayed that they, too, had discovered a way to keep going, even if it meant donning a lead-lined suit and breathing behind sealed glass. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Jonas. He offered her a small tin cup of purified water. She drank gratefully, feeling the cool liquid soothe her parched throat. Together, they stared across the ruined land, battered but not forsaken. Even if the surface was tainted with radiation, even if the ghosts of a once great civilization lingered on every street corner, even if mutated creatures roamed the outskirts, humanity endured. In the distance, faint lights flickered among the debris, like lonely stars. Perhaps it was just the reflection of the settlement's torch beams on twisted metal, or maybe it signaled other survivors, forging their own path in these dreadful wastes. The day would come when enough technology was reclaimed, enough knowledge pieced together, for humankind to ascend again. Until then, they would survive one salvage run at a time, each nuclear-powered step forward forging a new history in the glow of atomic dust. Nora finished her water and lowered the empty cup, her mind already turning toward the next mission, checking if there were more medical caches in that other metro section, or seeing if the old data center still held any intact archives. Each place represented danger, but also the potential for progress. She braced herself, feeling the silent hum of purpose in her bones. "I'll be ready," she said, her voice hardly more than a whisper. Jonas nodded, understanding passing, unspoken between them. In a broken, irradiated world, it fell to them, those willing to carry the nuclear burden on their backs, to ensure the future wouldn't remain buried beneath the ruins. And so, under that toxic sky, fueled by what had once brought civilization to its knees, they would venture forth again and again, forging tomorrow from the radioactive ashes of yesterday.